Okay. Okay, so we're holding the Gemara. In the middle of the Gemara about Doeg and Achitofel. So we're holding in the middle of the Amar Rabbi Yitzchak's. So the Gemara says like this. We're going to go back a drop. The Gemara says, so we said before, this is exactly what we're holding. But Amar Rabbi Yitzchak said as follows. It says, "My dechsiv." What does it mean? Ayei soifer. This is a pasuk in Yeshaya. Okay, and everyone's getting in. Oh, hey, Shaka, you got back in. Sorry about that. I was making coffee before. Okay, so this is where we're holding. We're holding the middle of the Gemara about Rabbi Yitzchak, about Doeg. So the Gemara says, "V'am Rabbi Yitzchak said like this: My dechsiv. What does it mean? Ayei sofer." So in Yeshaya, sofer in this case means the one who counts. Ayei shoikel, the one who weighs. Ayei sofer es hamigdalim, the one who counts the towers. So the Gemara says like this: Ayei sofer is who could count kol oisis sheb'Torah, all the letters of the Torah, the chaseros and yaseros, the extras and the mixings, to learn from it, different limudim, different understandings of halachas of Torah. Ayei shoikel, who's the one who counts? What does a shokel mean? Sheshoikel kol hakalim v'chamurim sheb'Torah, is able to count all the kal v'chomers of the Torah. And what's the idea of counting all the kal v'chomers of the Torah? What's the complication of it? The complication is because it's not so simple. We've learned before. We've learned before. I think in the Gemara and Sanhedrin itself about just coming up with the kal v'chomer on your own. But even more than that, it's not always so simple. What's a kal v'chomer? Kal v'chomer is if you have two things aligned with each other. One is so to say kal is easier, and the other one is chomer is more severe. So if in a more lenient situation, let's say, the law is so and so. So in a more severe situation, surely, right? So we learn, so from the lighter thing teaches the more heavier thing, but it's not always so clear what is the lighter thing, what's the heavier thing. Say it depends on the perspective. So who understood was able to weigh and value all the kal v'chomers of Torah. And what's Ayei Sofer? Who's the one who's able to count as Amigdalim, the towers? So what are the towers? There's different, we'll see different mefarshim, but it says Shayei Sofer Shalish Shmeis Halachis, was able to count 300 laws, psukos of established laws, that conclusions, b'migdal haparech ba'aver, in the laws of a building that's floating in the air. What's that mean? We'll see in a second. What does a migdal parech ba'aver mean? Okay, so he says that the Rashi says kol oisish shebetorah shayibaki b'chaseros v'yaseros. Obviously, we were referring to Doeg. We're describing the great scholar of Doeg and Achitofel, that they were such scholars, they understood every letter that was missing an extra in the Torah. Rashi says that he knew how to properly establish what is a kal v'chomer. Again, it's not so simple. It's he calls it in English, I think it's in Latin, a ferotary. I don't know how you pronounce it. Inference is the leniency and the stringency are not always consistent, and depending on the circumstances, the leniency could be transformed into something more stringent, or vice versa. Therefore, one must be careful to weigh the facts when drawing an a forotary, says the Marsha. So to a kal v'chomer, that's a kal v'chomer. So in order to properly understand the kal v'chomer, one needs to properly understand what is kal, what is light, and what is chomer, what's more severe. Again, these were both Achitofel and Doeg. Hashem, according to the Gemara, they both lived 34, 35 years old. They caused trouble, and they were giants in Torah. And their life was finished all within a short period of time. Okay, what is the idea of migdal parech ba'avir? A cupboard that floats in the air. So he says Rav Hai Gaon was one of the leaders after the time of the Talmud in the Gaonic time. He explains that the reference is to a wooden cupboard, and the problems that arise are problems that arise with regard to impurity imparted by a tent. It means if something is in an ohel, right? So we call asher bab oil. We're learning the halachas now in Parshas Chukas. the laws of the tent. That if you have something that's a tumas mace, a something that's impure through death in a tent, so anything in the tent becomes impure. The question is if there's anything that could be saved. We have a tzomit basil, we have things that are locked in. So the question about the cupboards laws within the tent of impurity. The cupboards floats in the air by means of a miracle or by means of some mechanical a magnet or something. So the idea is if it's not touching anything, we're going to see there's other laws of in a second we'll see migdal perech ba'aver. According to most mefarshim, the migdal perech ba'aver, for instance, you have the laws of a kohen. A kohen is not allowed to go into a cemetery. So if anyone's a kohen, we know the laws even till today. A kohen avoids going to a cemetery. But what happens if the kohen is in a migdal? The migdal is a protected space. And you're so what's the idea of migdal pareach ba'aver? Today it could be it's not they're trying to figure out magnets and ropes, but today we ideas of something flying in the air is not so complicated, right? You can have today they have these little self-made helicopters, little tiny helicopters I see you have online that you could drive over a cemetery, and if you're in a migdal, is it considered migdal ba'aver over a cemetery? There's the question of a plane flying over a cemetery. So he says, we're not going to get into the specifics of the law, but these are very complicated laws of the Torah. So the Rashi brings down this idea of the tent, or the Hari Goin brings down the thing of the tent, but the other Mefarshim bring down that it's also talking about the idea of Tumas Ha'amim, right? It's the idea that the Torah, according to the rabbis, anything outside of Eretz Yisrael, anything in Chutz La'aretz is considered a beis hapras. A beis hapras would be a field that's like been grounded with possibly body parts in it. So again, these are all the laws. If a person comes tamei, if you're in a migdal ba'aver, if you're in an enclosure, but you're flying through, and then there's laws if you open up and you come out, how long do you have to be there? If someone put you in there, there's all kind of laws that are connected to the idea of migdal ba'aver, of a cupboard in the air, flying over an impure space, whether it's in a tent or whether it's in a forest or a cemetery or Eretz Ha'amim outside of Eretz Yisrael, etc. Other Mefarshim actually learn, the Aruch learns, that has nothing to do, migdal ba'aver has nothing to do. Rashi also learns like this, nothing to do with a floating box, but it's referring to the lamed, right? Like over here in the word shokel. The lamed is the only letter that has a piece going upward. So we're trying to figure out that's the migdal, that's the tower. What is the significance of the letter lamed? Or some say that the end of the lamed is leaning backwards. All kind of different laws that they learned from different things, whether it's laws of impurity or laws of the letters. Again, these were understood by Doeg and Achitofel. Amar Rebbe says that Arba me'o baya bo'u Doeg v'Achitofel migdal perech ba'aver. They asked 400 questions about a floating tower or floating cupboard, or the lamed, depending to whose opinion. And no one was able to figure out their difficult questions in the laws of migdal ba'aver. Again, the laws of impurity, as everyone knows, is very complicated. Not just the specifics of the laws, but the math of the laws and the structures of the law. We know, for instance, when you learn Rambam, just Tumah has something very amazing that we don't see Tumah, we don't see impurity, but it's almost like a force. That if it goes out of any exit. So like, let's say, like gravity, if there's any window or any door, Tumah finds a way out. So therefore it saves all the other doors. There's a lot of complicated laws of Tumah. And they were able to ask 400 questions. No one's able to answer one of them. So Rav is not impressed. Rav says, we're going to find this is a very beautiful Gemara we're going to learn now. I spoke about it in my Drasha on Shabbos. It says, Omer Rav says, Ravus limiboy baye. Is it such a big deal for people to ask questions? Questions is not a big deal. It means someone who could figure out to ask questions, he's not impressed. Why? Bishnei de Rav Yehuda, in the days of Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda again was a student of Rav. This is not Rebbe Yehuda, but Rav Yehuda. That means he was an Amora. He lived in Babylon in the times and second generations of Talmudic times. Kula Tenunim ben Nezikin. Those days they preoccupied themselves in the laws of Nezikin. What's the laws of Nezikin? The laws of Nezikin are the laws of damages, right? Which is the fourth part of the Mishnah. The fourth book of the Mishnah is the laws of Nezikin, the laws of damages. That's what he dealt with. What's the laws of damages? What we're learning now, Sanhedrin is in Ezekiel, Baba Metzia, Baba Basra, Baba Kama, all those complicated laws of damages, that's what they preoccupied themselves with. but they didn't really get into the laws of purity, which are very difficult. Va'anan, meaning us, Rava, which was the next generation. Not only do we know the laws of tumatar, of pure and impurity, but we know the laws of uktzin, stems. What's the question of a stem? The stem is, how does the stem separate from the actual fruit? If the stem, because it comes impure, or liquids touch the stem, again, there's all kind of questions. There's handles when it comes to things of the Torah of purity. If a handle of something gets impure, how does that affect the actual, let's say, the vessel? Right? There's the handle of the vessel and the vessel. An ukatz is a stem. A stem is like a handle. There's leaves. How does that affect the main product? So these are all the questions of complicated laws. We learned those laws. They couldn't learn those laws. They only learned the laws of damages. So here we're going to go back a bit. Again, Reb Steinsaltz on the online version doesn't always have things in order. So we're going back a bit. What's Perek Ba'aver? What's a Migdal Perek Ba'aver? So Rashi, we learned that the Reb Steinsaltz brought down from Reb Haigon is the simple laws of a cupboard or something in a tent, or the others we quoted that's the idea of a floating tent in a cemetery or an Eretz Amim outside of Eretz Yisrael. You have to remember, we're going to learn this in a second by David HaMelech, that it's a very complicated idea, but really, as far as the law is concerned, any place out of Eretz Yisrael is tamei. In Eretz Yisrael itself, the law, if a person's a Kohen, is if you don't go to a cemetery, or if there's a place that you're concerned that people are buried, that's also part of the problem. But in Eretz Yisrael, the whole Eretz Yisrael has the law of a Beis HaPras. Beis HaPras means a field that's not a cemetery. There could have been body parts that were grounded in, and we don't know. It's a suffix. It's a doubt. So the whole of Chutz La'aretz, any place out of Eretz Yisrael, is considered a Beis HaPras. So that's very complicated, right? So if you're floating outside of Eretz Yisrael, obviously Terei Kohanim live outside of Eretz Yisrael. So again, these laws are not simple. So he says, what's Migdal Perek Ba'aver? So he says, Matagal Yonish L'mayl Min Alamid. So first Rashi learns is not just the stem sticking up of the lamed, but the crown, the upper crown of the lamed, mipnei makfu lamata. Why does it go downwards? Right? It means not only did he understand the significance of the crowns of the Torah, but he understood the significance of the shape and the direction of the crowns of the Torah. This is Achitofel and Doeg. Lashon Moiri Rabbi mipnei Shmuel. This is what my teacher taught me. Lashon Acher, another idea is b'migdal perech ba'avar nichnas l'eretz ha'amim. Rashi says we're talking about, like I said before, a cupboard that's floating in the air. Again, those days they're trying to figure out magnetic magic. Today it's not so difficult. I mean, for all practical purposes, that's an airplane or a helicopter, right? Which is, I would assume so, right? So it's an enclosure. B'shid tevo migdal in an enclosure. Imu tamei lav. Do you become tamei when you're floating over an Eretz Amim, Eretz Yisrael? If you take a plane and you're flying over a cemetery, is that a problem? Lashon, and by the way, I don't know if those are familiar with that, but El Al have a whole thing that Kohanim are careful. And back in the day, I don't know how it works today, but not 20 years ago, 30 years ago, El Al was avoiding to fly over cemeteries when they left Eretz Yisrael because of the Kohanim, even though this is considered a Shida and Tevo Migdal, an enclosure flying over. Obviously, they couldn't direct them outside of Eretz Yisrael, but within Eretz Yisrael, they wouldn't fly over cemeteries. Lashon Acher, I'm almost sure about that. Lashon Acher, another opinion is Gibel Meis Halachas b'Migdal Perech Ba'aver Lasis Kishuv. Not so much the laws of the impurity, but the laws of the Kishuv, of the magic that would allow for this floating thing to float in the air. Maybe it would meet today's science of the airplane science. Lahamid Migdal Ba'aver Kegoyin Shalish Meis Halachas Benetias Kishuin the Amram Perek Beprikin Delil. We learned before about the cucumbers. If you remember the magic they were using for the cucumbers on page 68. So also they were able to figure out 300 laws of the magic of if what's considered magic of a floating cupboard. Although Moiri Nira, my teacher, I guess that's different than Moiri Rabbi. The Hachigarsin Shlosh Meis Halachas Migdal Ha'omed Ba'avir Umishna Achas Ba'oyelais. He's talking about the laws of tents. The Mishtoi B'Hachi B'Migdal Ha'omer Ba'avir V'Tuma B'Toichai. That what happens if you have a migdal in the ear and you have tamei not on the outside of the migdal, outside of the cupboard, but tamei, you have tuma, you have something impure inside the migdal, inside the cupboard. So kelim shebetoichet tameim v'chein the laws of the other vessels that are inside, do they become tamei? Again, anyone who's going to learn Chumash this week in the beginning, we touch on these subjects of the tamei psil, the things that are saved in tents or in cupboards or in enclosures, etc. So Rava says, so basically what we're trying to say is they were very big Talmidei Chachamim. Doeg and Achitofel were big scholars. So Rava says big deal. So they asked 400 questions. Rabusa is it a big deal to ask questions? V'limu Torah, to learn Torah. It says Rachmana liba boy. We're going to see Torah doesn't want the Hashem. Rachman is referring to God. God doesn't want so much your knowledge. He wants your heart. He wants your heart. He wants to. Are you giving your full self? Like we learned in the Chida says that what does it mean liba baya? He wants unconditional connection to Hashem. Not that you have an agenda, not that you daven to God, you pray to God for reasons, but totally as a servant to God. That's what's most important. Not that Achitofel was so knowledgeable that he could ask 400 questions. Like we said before, in the days of Rabbi Yehuda, they only learned the laws of nizikin, which is damages, which is less complicated than the laws of purity and impurity. That's all they studied. They didn't go into the drushas, to the expansion of the laws of Tum and Tara. Okay, so here he says uksin, that Rava says that we did learn uksin. We're mid-conversation over here. But what is uksin? Rabbi Steinzalt says uksin is the final tractate in the Seder in the order of Taharas, which is the end of the Mishnayos, and discusses various connections related to impurity between the items that is susceptible to ritual impurity and its non-edible appendix or stems or leaves. So that you don't eat the stem, you don't eat the leaves. Do they become tamei? Can they cause tamei, tuma, etc.? The laws of uksin again are very complicated. Nevertheless, so we're mid-conversation. So what's Rava say? We're talking about no big deal for people to ask questions. And so even though Rabbi Yehuda learned consistently only the laws of damages, Rabbi Yehuda, and however, when Rabbi Yehuda reached the laws of Isha, Shekeveshes, Yarik Pikadera, a woman who pickles vegetables in a pot, and then it gets pickled together, and there's liquids and there's parts, or others say Zaysim Shekavshim B'Tarfein Tahirim, or if olives were pickled with their leaves and then they become soft. The problem is that one of the criterias of understanding a handle, they're called handles, to connection of the main part is if you could hold it by the handle. If you could hold something by its stem or you could hold something by its leaf, and you could pick up the main part, then it's connected to the main part. But when you pickle something, everything becomes soft and almost deteriorates, right? So if you were to even though the leaf is still on the olive when it's being pickled, but if you were to try to pick up the olive by the leaf, because it's soft and it's pickled, it's no longer connected. So now, what's the relation now between the leaf and the olive? So never, these are difficult laws. So Rabbi Yehuda would say, Havayis to Rabbi Shmuel kachazani hacha. I see the complicated questions of Rav and Shmuel. Again, Rav and Shmuel were the teachers of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda many times quotes, Rabbi Yehuda Rav. So his teacher Rav says, this is something my teacher would deal with. And Rava says, we're so much more learned, hypothetically, than Rav Yehuda, because we have 13 schools that are studying the laws of stems. And nevertheless, we'll skip the Rashi and go back a second. Nevertheless, he says, Rav Yehuda, when they needed rain, so there's different understandings of what happened there. Either that when they needed rain until he untied his shoes, meaning he settled down, it wouldn't rain until he settled, or they would take off their shoes as a way of praying for settling, like a person is in mourning. So Rabbi Yehuda shalif masne v'asat mitra. All he would have to do is untie one shoe to start praying for rain, and God saw that he's already untying his shoes. He's made it rain before he even took off his second shoe. Never mind before he started praying. That's how great Rabbi Yehuda was, although he didn't learn the laws of uksin. Vanan, us, meaning Rava says, who's us? Him, Abaya, his generation. So maybe the 2 generations later. Tzavchinan, we cry. We take off our shoes, we put on our talises, we mourn, we cry for rain. V'leikim de mashkacha, but no one's listening. What do we see from here? You're saying that Doeg and Achitofel were so great in Torah because they had so many questions about Migdal Pareach Ba'avir, about either the letters or the laws of purity. Rabbi Yehuda wasn't so into complicated things. He dealt with the laws of damages. But when he needed something, all he had to do was untie his shoe and God answered. So what's pshat? What's that? What's the reason? God wants your heart. Doesn't want to, your mind is nice. Of course, you have to study Torah. But what's going on? What's going on inside your heart? Where's your heart? Where's your heart holding? Where's your commitment holding? The chsiv, as the verse says in Shmuel, Vashem yira levav. God is looking into the heart of the person. When you look into the heart of the person, so Rav Yehuda had the heart for God, and therefore all he had to do is untie his shoelaces and start to read. Okay, let's see the Rashis again. We'll go quickly. These Rashis is just trying to describe the complications of what Rabbi Yehuda didn't want to learn. Right? It's when the Rebbe started, this is Rebbe's Yortzeit this week. The Rebbe started the idea of learning Rambam. Also, those who learn Daf Yomi, but Daf Yomi, the Gemaras have less than Rambam. Rambam covers all the issues, especially the laws of impurity, and those are not the funnest chapters of Rambam to learn when you're dealing with impurity. Or now we're learning Klai, right? There's things that are easier to understand and things less easy to understand. So he says, a woman who pickles vegetables in a pot. Again, so when you pickles vegetables in a pot, there's a lot of questions here. What happens if the two, you could have two vegetables, seemingly the same vegetables, but one could be kadosh, one could be something that belongs to hegdish. And then you're not allowed to eat something that belongs to hegdish. How does the pickling affect the products? Rashi says, I haven't found these laws in the tractate of Uktzin, of stems. If you pickle vegetables in vinegar, right? So the question is that if you have impurities and you touch the oikits, you touch the stem and the stem. So basically, is the stem now part of the vegetable because you pickled it as a whole with its stem? So therefore, if something happens to the stem in a question of impurity, does it affect the entire fruit or vegetable? So he's saying no. The only reason why they put the stem is not because they need it and not because it adds in taste, but only because it adds in look. Mara means look. It's a presentation question, right? A lot of times people leave the leaves of something on as a presentation, right? In America, they made it a big deal if you buy tomatoes with a vine. So now if the vine is like an oketz, right? The vine is considered a stem. So if the vine, let's say you go to QFC, you go in Seattle, you touch the stem of the tomato. Does the tomato become impure? Is that really one part? So then we all know that the reason they do with the stem is more of it's a look. It's lamara. It helps in sales. It makes it look more like it just came out of the farm, right? Or zeisim shekavshem b'tarfeim, or olives that were pickled not in their stems but in their leaves, like in the tractate of Uktzin. Tarfein olin shlem tahirim hazeisim she'ein asalem beis yad lachnis lam tuma. The leaves are disconnected from the olives, so they can't give each other impurities. And he says these are complicated laws. These are laws of Rab and Shmuel. He didn't know why they're still impure. As far as he was concerned, maybe they are considered part of the fruit or the vegetable. And he says, Rava said about us, in his generation, Tlasar Misifta, they had 13 academies. Yud Gimel Yeshivos. And the whole yeshiva, everyone know, I don't know if people are familiar, for instance, till today, but seemingly what Rava was bragging about till today, right? If you want to, when in the world of shidduchim, you want to know if the person's a Talmud Chacham, where does the person learn? What subjects do they learn, right? So everyone knows that someone who learns in Brisk, right? The Brisk learns Kachim. That means, the Kachim is laws of things that are holy for the temple. Right, that's not typical. Typical yeshiva also learns Nezikin, learns laws of damages. Right, what do we learn in the yeshiva? Baba Metzia, Baba Basra, laws of Nashim, Gittin, Kedushin. But in Brisk they learn Kachim. So everyone knows, that Bacher, that young boy goes to the academy that studies the laws of Kachim. He must be a genius. He's studying complicated laws. Or if someone studies the Yishalmis, it's all about. So Rav was saying, in our yeshivas we have 13 yeshivas that learn the laws of Uktzin and the laws of stems. But Yoidim Aisa Yafim, we don't just learn it; we know it well. Nevertheless, when it comes to who's a chassid, who's a righteous person, who's a person that God listens to, it's not so much that what you're studying, what yeshiva you're studying to. God wants your hearts. Okay, we'll go a little quickly. And Rabbi, again, this is not so much the topic that we're learning. We want to get a little further. We'll skip this note about, again, the laws of the questions, the laws of impurity of an impurity on the vegetables, with the leaves, with the uktzim, with the handles. They're called the handles, right? The stems or the leaves, etc. Amar Rav Masharshi said like this: that Doeg v'Achitophel loy havas for shmaitza. That Doeg and Achitophel did not comprehend the halachic discussions. They weren't good at they didn't understand the laws. Mazut says, what do you mean? We just discussed what kind of great scholars they were. We just quoted the verse in Isaiah that says, who's the one who could count the letters, who could weigh the laws of the Kal V'chomer, who knows the laws of Migdal Peireach, the laws of the flying cupboards, or the letters, whatever, the letter of the Lamed, whatever, however you understand the interpretation. We're not talking about Doeg, so how could you say he didn't know the law? Vata Martin, you say, he didn't comprehend the laws. This is a big deal, by the way. It's an idea of B'siyata D'Shmaya. It's an idea that with David, that was the whole idea. That they were jealous. In other Gemaras, I think it says about they were jealous of King David, was that the law was always like King David. The Havaya Imai, it's brought down. The God was with David. That when they learned in the Beis Medrash, right, and they sat in the yeshiva, again, we learned that the whole, even when Doeg, remember we learned a few pages ago, that even when Doeg was trying to entice the jealousy of Saul on David, what did he say? He talked about his knowledge of Torah. That was a badge of honor, a badge of respect. Was not your bank account, or not your job, or not your whatever your boat, or your watch, your car. The badge of respect in the times of King David and Saul, even though some of these people weren't good people. Doeg and Achitophel were Rishayim. What was your badge of honor? Is how you studied in the Beis Medrash. What do you know in your Torah study? And here it says that the law was always according to David. And it says the law have a salka leushmaitza lib deilchasa. They could understand the laws, but they couldn't get to the conclusion that this is the ruling. The ruling wasn't like them. They thought that when only after we're going to learn now that David sinned with Batsheva, that God wouldn't be with David anymore. They had a burning jealousy that God was always with David when it came to the law. The Chsiv Soid Hashem. You want to know the true secrets of God. L'reyav is only for those who fear Hashem. Someone who has yira, they didn't have yiras Hashem, so they didn't have the Soid, they didn't have the secret of the actual law, not the questions. Everyone could ask questions. We're not talking about the pilpul. We're talking about the aliba de hilchasa. When you learn something, that you need siyata d'shmaya. That's a known thing. That's we have large tefillos, right? The tefillos Ramban, the Nachmanides prayer when a person goes into the Beis Medrash, that you shouldn't just learn Torah, but you should learn Talib de Hilchasa. You shouldn't, God forbid, say something that's not wrong, teach something that's wrong, someone who learned the wrong law to you. That you need siyata d'shmaya. God is with you. Avaya imai. That doesn't come just out of nowhere. That comes from Sayyid Hashem L'Reyav, someone who fears God. God is with that person to guide that person, sometimes subconsciously, to the right conclusion to the law. So it says, they couldn't really give it proper understanding. Rashi says that what was the answer to Masutra? Not that they didn't understand the depth of the law, but the law wasn't according to them. It means in the discussion of the law, they were great. But in Kaiveya, in establishing what is the actual law, that they weren't, God wasn't with them. Amar Abami, like we said before, David didn't want even Doeg to be mentioned in the Beis Medrash. Amar Abami said as follows: By the time Doeg passed away, he forgot all his studies. Shnemar hu yamas be'ein musar u'berei vivalta yishke. So it says, he shall die for want of instruction, means he's lacking his instruction of Torah, and in his folly he shall go astray, which is talking about Doeg. Rav Ashi Amar nitztara. He also got leprosy. We see this before. We're going to see this in Gehazi. Even King David got leprosy. We've been learning in this a few weeks ago. Miriam got leprosy. Leprosy was something of a sign of rebuke. So Rashi says nitztara, like we said before, he got tzaras because he spoke lashon hara about David. Shnemar he tzamta kol zayne mimeka, that go far from you shall perish and you destroy. So they go far. So tzmisus means to go away is a sign of leprosy. A person who's in leprosy is disconnected. It says over here, ksiv hachet says over here, hold on. Some people say it's not Rav Ami. It's not, it's Rav. Okay. Ksiv Has, I don't know what it says. The Gemara I have over here says Rav says here. Reb Stein says, Reb Ashi says. Ksiv Hasim, it says the Tzmisus. It says over here. It talks over here means in the laws of the lands that go back in the Jubilee. So it says Tzmisus, Metagimin, and Chalutin. The question is, when does, when there's again complicated laws of Cherem, when you give lands to the Kohen or to the Beis Hamikdash. So in what cases does it get totally taken, or what cases can it be redeemed up to the Jubilee? So tzmisus means lachalutin, totally given over. Utanan ein bein musker umuchlatim. We also learn that there's no difference between a person who has leprosy who's locked up while he or she's being checked, or muchlit, or he or she already been established. It means when what happened, the laws is obviously when someone had tzras, someone has leprosy, you show it to the Kohen, right? You learn this in Tazria Mitzorah. You show it to the Kohen. And the Kohen has to see if it's leprosy or if it's even a candidate for leprosy. And then we have to see if it doesn't have all the leprosy, and we just want to see if it's going to turn into impure leprosy, the person would be locked up. I mean, not locked up, means put away, muskars, set aside. And after a week or 2 weeks, the Kohen would come and check if it continued to expand or what have you, the different signs of leprosy. So then the person would be considered muchlat, the person would be considered a leper, and then he has to leave outside, etc. But if it goes away or becomes less, then they let the person, they declare it to be not leprosy or not leprosy yet. It could still turn into leprosy at a later point. But what's the difference in a person who's been muskar, who's waiting to find out if he or she has leprosy, or muchlat, it's already been established? Eleprio prima is only the difference is in letting your hair grow on your and ripping the clothing as a sign of leprosy. So again, we use the word muchlat, the completion. So we see the idea of chalutin tzmitzos. From here, we're trying to show that the verse that says he tzmata, the word tzmisus, kozena mimeko, those who go astray, is referring to Doeg, means it's a sign. It's tzmisus. Chalutin means the sign of leprosy. It's just a building a case that Rav says that he had leprosy. Both quarantine leper, he says over here, both quarantine leper, in other words, one who saw leprous marks on his or her skin, but the priest has not yet determined whether it is he is afflicted with leprosy, and a confirmed leopard, one who's already been confirmed to have leprosy. So what's the difference between the two? Whose condition has been confirmed that the priest transmits all impurity associated with one afflicted with leprosy. The difference between them is only that a confirmed leper is obligated to let his hair grow and rend his garments. And a quarantine leper is not obligated to do so. Again, the word muskar better is quarantine. So you go into quarantine, so you shouldn't give off impurity. Okay. The Gemara says, Siman Shleisha Ra v'Chatzikra. The simanim of the Gemara are very symbolic, but they're more mystic. Let's go further. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says like this. Shleisha Malchi Chabala Nizdamnu Loi LeDoeg. 3 angels of destruction came to Doeg, seemingly as he's dying. Echad sheshikach Talmud, they one caused him to forget his Torah study. That's obviously while he was still alive, I'm assuming. Echad shesarf nishmasei, one who burnt his soul. This is a crazy concept. We find there's a punishment that not only do you die in your body, we know the four deaths of Bezdin doesn't affect your soul. It's a way of cleansing your soul. That's what we learned before. If you remember, Yeshua told Achen to do tshuva. Why? Because if you do tshuva, then he could fix through the death, he could fix his Aveira. But Doeg, not only did he die, but he burnt his soul. Ve'echad, and a third angel, Shepizer afarai bebate knisayis bet midrashes. He spread his ashes over the synagogues and the houses of study. I'm assuming it means the ashes of his soul, because we don't burn bodies. So the ashes of his soul, it says he burnt his soul. The ashes of his soul, kind of obviously not in a way that we could see, was spread out in the yeshivos. So he says, why did they spread his soul into the yeshivos? First of all, the question is, why did they make him forget his studying? So the Gemara, one of the Mefarshim say, because it's brought down that a Talmud Chacham, a person of scholar, is the fire of hell doesn't burn that person. One of the things Torah protects a person. So in order for him to not, that hell should affect Doeg, and they wanted him to go to hell, was they had to make him forget his study. And the idea of he says another thing. The Maharsha says it's not just unique to Doeg. The idea of throwing the ashes of the soul in the Beis Medrash, it says so they should be stepped on the feet of the tzaddikim. I'm not sure if that's a desecration or a kapara or in a way of atonement. But it says that the Torah's Chaim says, and the Maharsha says, that other wicked people also get their souls burnt and put into the Beis Medrash. Here he says like this: who dispersed his ashes of his soul. This was done to fulfill that which is written, and you shall tread down the wicked, for they shall be ashes under the soles of your feet in Malachi. And that punishment was administered in this world. That in this world his soul was burnt into the Beis Medrash. Okay, let's continue. Rabbi Yochanan said about Doeg and Achitophel. The Doeg and Achitophel, again, just the line of history. King David is a young shepherd, the youngest son of Yishai, living in Beit Lechem in the time around when Saul, we don't know how long Saul was king, but when Saul was in the beginning of his rule, and he's faced by the Philistines and Doeg, right, the giant, that the whole story of the giant in Beit Shemesh. David is already by that point anointed as the successor after Saul lost his kingdom because of the way he behaved, and specifically with the killing of Amalek, right? The nation of Amalek. That's when Saul said, "I'm picking someone else." God's picked someone else. David was anointed, but he's still unknown. He comes to the battle of the Philistines, and he kills Og. He kills Goliath the giant. He kills Goliath the giant, and that leads to him marrying Michal Bas. He becomes the king. That was the reward. He made the son-in-law of the king. He becomes a general. He becomes the most successful general, and Saul becomes very, very jealous of him, and that's the story of David and Saul. In that time, there was Doeg. Doeg was the one who was pursuing David on command of Saul. He's the one who killed the city of Nov, of the Kohanim. He's the one who made Saul jealous. He started to arouse. Maybe Saul wouldn't have paid attention to David, but he didn't give in. He made sure Saul would be jealous of David. And then Achitophel comes later. Achitophel is once David's king. He starts off as a strong member. Again, Achitophel, we said, is a huge Talmud Chacham. Him and Doeg understood great subjects of Torah. They say he was the Av Bezdin. He was the second in command of the Sanhedrin. He ends up being David's father-in-law. That's complicated because of how young he was. We dealt with that subject a few months ago, maybe a year ago, of how Achitophel could be David's father-in-law in age as that far as goes. He was a great scholar. He was a great advisor to David, a great adversary to David. David had two people that he called his enemies specifically. That's Doeg and Achitophel. So here Rabbi Yochanan says, Doeg v'Achitophel lo yira'u. They didn't see each other. They didn't know each other. Doeg b'mei Shaul, because Doeg was in the days of Saul. Achitophel b'mei David, and Achitophel was in the days of David. Rabbi Yochanan says, it doesn't say if they didn't see each other, or if they didn't, he says over here, I'll look into it, I'll post it, that Mashra does the exact calculation how the Imamish didn't see each other. All right, Rabbi Yochanan says, they didn't live half their life. Again, the Torah describes a full life as 70, right? Im shivim shana, im shmonim shana, right? So 70 is like a year. When you say a person lives a full life, is 70 years. So half of 70 years is less than 35. So it says, they didn't even live half their life. Tanya, Nami Hachi, Anshek, and we know again in chapter 55 of Tehillim, and David, really, that's the tefillah of, and again, Chabad, that's the vein tefillah, that's the Pada B'Shalom Nafshi, right? Then chapter 55 of Tehillim, Ani Eftach Bach, and he talks about his enemies. So who's Anshe Damim, people of blood, Umirma, and deceit? That David prays, Lo yechzu yameim, they shouldn't live out half their life, is Doeg and Achitophel. And Kol Shnoisav shall Doeg, Lo hayu ela shloishim v'arba, Doeg only lived to 34, v'ashal Achitophel en shloishim v'shalish, Achitophel lived 1 year less of 33. Again, in the Maharsha, he goes into the calculation how they never saw each other. V'am Rabbi Yochanan, meaning to say, if they're both great Torah giants and advisors to kings and Sanhedrin, chances are they would see each other. So they said they didn't see each other. V'am Rabbi Yochanan says, Betchila kar David Achitophel Rabbi. Right, we have the famous Mishnah in Perek Chelek that David called his teacher Achitophel his teacher. L'seif kari chaveroi, then he called him his companion. L'seif kari talmidoi, then he called him his student. B'tchila kari rabbi, and initially he called him his teacher because we have a verse that says, "Va'ata enish ke'erki alufa yimedoi, you're my alufa, you're my teacher." And L'seif kari chaveri, he called him his friend. Asher yachtav namtik soid beis elikim nalich beragesh. Together, as a sign of companionship, will sweeten the secrets of God in the house of God. Well, Lasaif at the end it says Kar Talmidi called him a student, as it says that Gam Ish Shloimi Asher Betachti Boy, that even my my familiar friend whom I trusted ended up being his enemy. His trust is a sign of that he trusted him. He was his teacher. Achitophel became the student. So he says Alufa is Rebbe. I'm make sure that I'm not missing anything on the bottom of the page. Sorry. Yeah. They said this finishes the page. Let's go up to the next page. It says, who did eat of my bread as a student and has lifted his heel against me again. This is in Tehillim 41. Again, he's talking about what does it mean he ate my bread? He studied from me. Torah is called lechem. So he ate my bread, he studied from me, nevertheless, he rebelled against David, he supported Avshalom later towards the end of David's life in the rebellion of his son. Achitophel was there as part of that rebellion. Okay, he was the advisor of the rebellion. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav. Okay, now we're crossing over. We have 20 minutes. We're going to cross over to the next complicated subject, of course, in David's life, which is the story of David and Batsheva. We have to understand the story as the Gemara and Torah sees it, not obviously as the movies show it. It's not just a love story between a king and a married woman. You have to, first of all, before we start the Gemara, we have to know the idea that that whoever went out to the wars of David used to give a divorce to their wife. So you have to understand something. It wasn't so simple. She wasn't a married woman. It was a conditional divorce, but basically because they didn't want the wives to be agunas or what have you, they'd be left with unknown circumstances of their husbands. So the Chayel Beis David, those who were the students of the soldiers of David before they went out to war, they would give a divorce to their wife. When they would come back, they would take them back. Uriah, which is the husband of Batsheva, was out in war at the time, right? That's the whole story, that David then puts him in a position to get killed. But he also was, and he was rebellious against David. It's not, again, he was a married b'malchus. The story is not as it seems on paper, again, as it's showed in the movies. But she wasn't married, so to say, halachically, that he slept with a married woman, but she was someone's wife at the same time because they would come back and redo the marriage after the war. Now, again, of course, in Chassidus, we learned that's one of the most deep Hasidic concepts taught by the Rebbe Rashab. The idea when you go out to the war, you have to divorce yourself from all things that would hold you back from being a proper soldier of God. The Rebbe would, the Friedrich Rebbe, the Rebbe Rashab would apply this to the Chayal Beis David, to the students of Torah. When you go into the yeshivas, you go out to do the work of God as a soldier of God. You have to divorce yourself from any other worldly distractions. But that's the idea of it. But let's now see the story as it's told in our Gemara here. It's obviously mentioned in other places. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Again, we see here Rav Yehuda was a student of Rav. This is what we say always in davening. We pray in the morning. We don't ask. No one asks God to be tested. Nisayon is to be tested. A person should not look to be tested. And we always don't bring us to Nisayon. It's a prayer. It's not don't test yourself. It's not a game that's going to end well. Life is difficult enough as it is to be a frum Yid and to be a God-fearing Jew. You don't have to. No one's asking you to go up extreme. But this is the story. A person should not try to test themselves or be tested. Sharei, how did this whole story of David and Batsheva unfold? Sharei David HaMelech Yisrael, David, the king of the Jewish people. You have to remember, the king of the Jewish people is David. In the history, there's other kings. There's Saul. There's a list of great kings after David that are descendants of David. We learn about them: Chizkiyahu, Yeshayahu, Yehoshaphat. No one's David. David is the king. When you say David Melech Yisrael, Malchus, Mashiach, it's all conditional. It's all about David. In this next week's parsha, when we talk about, according to Rashi, we talk about the prophecy of Bilam. It's David and Mashiach. So David is Melech Yisrael. So David Melech Yisrael, Hevi Atzmi de Nisayin v'Nichshal. He asked to be challenged. He asked to be tested, and v'Nichshal, and he stumbled. He didn't stand the test. Amr lefanav. He said before God as follows. This is where he set himself up to be tested. Rebbeinu Shalai, the Master of the universe. Mipnei ma oimer. Why do we say in the opening prayer of the Amidah, right, the first blessing, we say Baruch atah Elokei Avram, God of Avram, Elokei Yitzchak, the God of Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov, and the God of Yaakov. It means we mention the three fathers. You don't say the father of David. Why am I not mentioned in the opening prayer of the Shemona Esrei? Why would David think that he should be in the opening prayer? I mean, it's not egotistic, but because we know that there's four parts of the chariot, the 4 feet of the chariot of the Merkava, and who's the fourth one? David. Dalit Ragli Merkava is Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, David. Some people say Rachel, our mother Rachel, but a lot of the opinions is David. Based on the idea that David was the fourth part of the chariot, he says, if you're mentioning the 3 of them, why am I not included? Elokei David. So God says, what do you mean? We have a prayer for David. This is another thing. This is all, it gets complicated. David, we have a prayer for David. Anyone knows? What do we say, Magen David? At the end of Haftorah. When we read the Haftorah on a Shabbos or Yom Tov, we also say a protection of the protector of David. But he wants to be included in the opening bracha. Some people say the reason he thought that he should be in the opening blessing is because we have the bracha of the Haftorah Magen David. It says, David. So God answered him, Inu minsuli, I tested them. They stood up to a challenge. God, right? How many times is Avram tested? Perek Chelek says he was tested 10 times. Yitzchak was tested. Yaakov was tested. So they're worthy to be in the first blessing. You weren't tested. You didn't go through any great tests. You haven't been examined. So David answered, he says, examine and test me. Subject me to an ordeal. Shenemar, as the verse says in Tehillim chapter 26, B'chaneni Hashem v'naseni. He says he was tested. David asked to be tested so he could be on the blessing. For what reason? So Rav Steiner says, some explain David's question was based on God's promise to him, and I will make you great, make you a great name like the name of the great men on the earth, which is referring to Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, meaning that after reading the Haftorah, one recites the blessings, shield of David, Magen David, parallel to the blessing in Amidah of shield of Avram. Since David was worthy of God being referred to, in that manner, that he was considered the protector of David. That means, what do we say? Like, what do we praise about God? That God is the protector of David. He saw fit to request that he would to be mentioned in the blessing of the patriarchs in the first blessing. That's what the Riyaf says. Pinto. Then Yaakov just says that the idea that he says in front of him, why do we say l'olam? Never. A person should never, so to say, be tested, because even David, who was so righteous that he eradicated the Yetzer Hara, says, "Libi cholo b'kirbi," my heart was void of any of the Yetzer Hara. Nevertheless, he didn't withstand the test. Others say, obviously, he knew that he wouldn't be mentioned while he was alive, because we don't say Elikei. It's a famous thing. God doesn't put his name on the righteous until he died. Only the whole complicated Rashi. Why does he say Elikei Yitzchak? Only because Yitzchak was blind. So God could say, I'm sure that he will never sin. But David wasn't expecting to be in the blessing now, but he wanted later to be in the blessing. Okay. So he says like this. So he wants to be tested. So what happens? Amar min silach. So God says, if you want, I will test you. I'm going to do something for you, because them, I didn't let them know that they're going to be tested. I didn't give them warning. The fathers didn't get, God didn't tell Avram, I'm going to test you, be prepared. And I'm letting you know that I'm going to test you. And I'm going to tell you what I'm going to test you in. I'm going to test you in a davar erva, something that's involved with a married woman. He told him, I'm letting you know, I'm giving you advance. You're going to be tested with an idea that's related to an erva married woman, or a woman that's an erva to you, that you shouldn't be with. So miyad v'hi le'eser v'yakum David me'al mishkaveh. And what happened? As but right away, David woke up, mishkaveh, from his place of rest. We'll see what that means. And he was standing on the patio and he sees Batsheva. So what does it mean, Vayakum David me'al mishkaveh, that he got up from his bed? Rav Yehuda says, David knows from God now that what is God going to test him with a married woman. So when is he going to be vulnerable to that? Throughout his day, when he may come into account, he may come to a situation where he's with a married woman and he's going to be tested. So he switched. Instead of waiting a whole night to have relations with one of his wives, and maybe throughout the day his Yetzer Hara will be burning within inside him until he goes to sleep at night. He would sleep. He would have relations with his wife in the morning, shal yoim, and then like this he felt that he was safe a whole day because he already, so to say, got it out of his system. So he thought that he's shielding himself by having relations with his wives at night, in the morning. Like this, throughout the day, he won't be vulnerable. But he forgot the halacha. Now, over here, not halacha meaning to say a law, but a rule. And the rule is that there's a small limb by a man, that if you satisfy it, it becomes hungry. Marivai saveya. If you hunger it, it isn't be satisfied. If you starve it, it'll be satisfied. So the more you give, the more you have relations, the hungrier you are. The hungrier you are, on the contrary, by having relations in the morning, made you more vulnerable by day, because the more you have relations, the more you're going to be hungry for more relations. So that's what David thought. He's protecting himself, and he forgot the rule of thumb that what he did actually was counterproductive. That he's changed his times of relations from night to day. He would have relations with his wives in the day, in the morning, so to say. So he should be satisfied for need of relationship. He shouldn't think about another woman, and he won't be vulnerable if that happens. However, he forgot the rule. The more you satisfy yourself, is the more you're going to be hungry for more. So then what happens? So he wakes up in the morning and he already feels that he's, so to say, protected. He goes on to the patio, the roof, so to say, the porch of the house of the king, of the palace. He sees a woman washing. Batsheva was shampooing her hair, and the woman was very beautiful. What happened? It says Batsheva Batsheva was a modest woman. She wouldn't just sit there in her backyard, exposed, so to say, to the visions of the people from above, washing her hair in a way that's immodest, that would reveal herself in some way. She was hiding behind the beehive, which she was protected from visual. Asa Satan, so Satan came. So he has to get involved, obviously, right? So he comes in. He comes in the appearance of a bird. He flies around David to catch David's attention. We've learned this before, right? That David's always, whenever he would see an animal, he was always running after it to hunt it or kill it, right? That's how he got involved with Yishbi, right? With Yishbi Benov. How did he end up in Yishbi Benov? Then also the Satan was like a deer, and David was chasing him to hunt him. And the next thing he knows, he's captured by Yishbi Benov. We learned that a few months ago. So here also the Satan comes in the form of a bird. Pataklai by Geira. So David shot an arrow or a spear at the bird, and Patka lechalta yigal v'chazia. And instead of hitting the bird, he hit the beehive. The beehive, obviously, or the net, whatever it was that was protecting Batsheva from visual, kind of fell apart. And now all of a sudden she's standing in front of him and he sees her. So chalta is a kaveris, is a beehive. Patka geira bekaveret. He threw the arrow or the what's it called, the spear at the kaveret, at the beehive. Claim shehika v'shavra lashnacher pascha shavra v'niftecha. Either way, the bird, the Satan was in a bird, and the bird, he tried to catch the bird, and then he is all of a sudden vulnerable to Batsheva. According to the Gonim, this term means a mat. Other side of variant reading, meaning a netting. Okay. Whatever it was, something that was protecting Batsheva from vision, that's no longer there. Why? Because he broke it with the spear. A lot of the commentaries say that David was so cautious that the halach isn't that a person is not supposed to have relations by day. The Aruch says that he even had by day, so he shouldn't have to fall for any temptation. Okay. So he says like this. So what happens? Right away he sees her, he falls in, an instant in love with her. And he finds out who is she. And they say to him, I guess the servants, Batsheva bas Eliam, she is Batsheva, the daughter of Eliam, Eshes Uriah Achiti, the wife of Uriah Achiti, means she's still known as his wife, even though if we say that they wrote divorce papers, but that was just in case of an emergency. He sent messengers to her, and she went to him. We're not going to get into that part. It doesn't say that he asked for her to come, and she came. He slept with her, and the Torah tells us, it's funny, the Gemara tells us that you should know that she wasn't in a situation of impurity. If her husband's out the war, maybe she didn't go to the mikvah. She was miskadeshes mitumasa. She was purified from her impurities. Obviously, if that's not the problem, so then it wasn't. Obviously, she wasn't technically married. But Tasha Valbesa, and then she went back home. How do we know? And then afterwards, obviously, the story plays out that David kills Uriah the Chiti, and then he marries Batsheva. We're going to see clearly the Gemara, as far as the Gemara is concerned, there's no opinion that holds. What David did, the chapter 51 in Tehillim, that Nasan and Navi comes, he ended up being punished. He lost his child that he had with her, his initial child, but she's the mother of Solomon, right? She's the future. She's the mother of Mashiach. Is Batsheva. This is not she stays married to him. She's his loyal wife. The end of his life, she's the one who pleads for the life of Solomon. They were meant to be together, just not yet. He went too fast. So he says, "Vatashav abeisa v'hain l'chsiv," and this is what he says: "B'chanti libi, I was tested. B'kadet halayla tzaraftani bal timtza zamoisi bal yavrapi." He says David realized he made a mistake. He goes, "You have proved my heart. You have visited me in the night. You have tired me, but you find nothing. Let no presumptuous thought pass my lips." Amr iku zemama nafel pume deman desanilev lay amar kihad milsa. He said about himself. He's talking about himself. He says, David said, "Oh, that muzzle would have fallen upon the mouth of the one who hates me," as his own mouth. "I will not have said anything like that." He regretted testing himself. God tested him, and he failed the test. So he says, "Miskadeshes mitumasa, aisa shah paska tumasa leibala kashinida." The Gemara tells us that she was not a nida; she was not impure. So we shouldn't think that David slept with Batsheva, that she was impure, indicating that it wasn't such. You can't, if the famous story of a chassid who goes to the Rebbe Levi Yitzchak Berditchev, and he says to Rebbe Levi Yitzchak Berditchev, he needs a tikkun, he needs a fixing. A fixing means he needs to fix an avera. What is an avera? He goes, "I had a relation with an unmarried woman." He says, "Okay." "Okay, it's not as great as having obviously relations with a married woman." He said, "But the problem was she's a nida, right? Unmarried women don't go to the mikveh usually." He says, "No. We waited the time, and she went to the mikveh and everything." So Rebbe Levi Yitzchak said, "You waited 7 days to do an avera. I can't help you. Go to the Alter Rebbe." The famous thing, he went to the Alter Rebbe, got a tikkun. You see clearly what was the problem, that she was maybe a nida, she maybe was impure. So here we're saying Batsheva wasn't impure. Obviously, it's a greater thing if she was married. It's I was checked. I was lacking for something that happens at night. If I could be tested in an avera, and he couldn't. I thought to maybe make things early in the morning to try to get out of the temptation. It didn't work for me. If I had a muzzle, he says, if I wish I had a muzzle on my mouth, then I wouldn't have asked God to test me. David fasted for this his whole life. So let's just finish off on something positive. Darish Rava says, what does it mean? God says, the David says to God, forgive me for the sin. He says, forgive me So the people will not say the mountain, again, David's the king. The mountain among view was driven by a bird, right? The bird of the Satan. Har shebechem, melech shlechem, tzipor nedato, daidei tzipor, nitra, like we said, that the Satan became like a bird. Let's just do one more. Darsh Rav says, what does it mean? I sin to you, and in front of your eyes, Leman titzlak b'dvarecha tiska b'shavtecha. I did it so your words should be right. What does it mean? Omer David God said to David. David said to God, Gola v'yediya kamach de'i ba'i lemichbre litzri have kafina el amina delay lemeru avda zachi lemare. David says, I did this one, God, I did it for you. He says to God in an open conversation, right? God knows everything. He says, it is revealed and you know before, and it's known before you, that if I sought to suppress my evil inclination, I would have suppressed it. You know, I could have done it. But I said that it would be that it's not good for a servant to beat the master, right? What would happen? If David would be right, he would win God in a bet, right? God made a bet with David, basically. He says, you want to be mentioned in the first blessing? Let me test you. Had David passed the test, he would have proved that he's right in God, so to say, should have always included him in the blessing. So he kind of said, Rava says, he said to God, you know that I could have withstood it. I kind of let myself lose this test, so that they shouldn't say that the student beat the teacher. And he proved him right. All right, we'll stop here. We continue with the story of Batsheva next week. Mir Hashem. Let's just do one more because it's a positive thing. What does it mean? So what does this verse mean? Which means, for I am ready to stumble, and my pain is always before me. David and Batsheva were not supposed to be together, not just 40 days. From the first creation of the world, the 6 days of creation, it was meant that David should be with Batsheva. I love it came to him in a painful way. So to the students of Rabbi Shmuel said, the Yeshiva said, David was supposed to be with Batsheva. He went a little too fast. He ate it unripe, meaning to say, it was supposed to take its time. David tried to do it a little too early and wait. Instead, he took it while her husband was still alive. Okay, so let's just finish off the Rashi. What is it called? Tzela. Just like Eve was a part of Adam, they were meant to be together. So too Batsheva was so much like a tzela, like a limb of David. She was meant to be with him. But nonetheless, he went too soon. And it came in a way of a sin. All right, everyone. Again, this is a complicated Gemara, but we have to understand it in the greater context. And we'll continue with the story of Mir Hashem next week. Laila Tov, everyone, and Shavuot Tov. Take care.